Do the Jazz have their star yet? Is the timeline to win revolving around Lauri Markkanen, Keyonte George, or neither? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. You guys know me now, and as always, I'm excited and honored to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 2023 NBA Combine, soon to be attendee of the 2024 NBA Combine, Utah Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician for the past 3 seasons, lover of basketball and all sorts, college and professional. So I'll give you interesting insight for the NBA draft to come. And of course, we'll talk about that here, as well as someone who just loves to dive into film. And that's what I did for another one of these segments, breaking down some of the playoffs, which we have observed in the last few nights. So I'm excited to make it my job to make you guys as knowledgeable as possible for your Utah Jazz. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is the Jazz's star to build around Lauri or Keyonte, or not on the roster yet? And then maybe specify who if you have someone in mind. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. As always, check out the brilliant people over at FanDuel and their projections, and you can make some wagers over there. So check it out and get involved with the playoffs or the beginning of the MLB season. In the first segment, I'll address a popular question around Jazz Twitter. Is our timeline fit more around Keyonte or Lauri or neither? In the second segment, I'll address some more of the remaining top draft prospects that I haven't gone over yet. And this time it's Nikola, Alexander Sarr, and Zacharie Risacher. So 3 foreigners who figure to be in the top 10, and many think in the top 5 of the NBA draft, should the Jazz get a pick in the top 5, which, or I guess top 4, which we think is possible with a 26% chance. And in the final segment, we'll go over how the Nuggets were able to eke out Game 2 and what tactical adjustments won them the game. Let's dive right in. So the question is effectively, do the Jazz have their star to build around already? And who and how are they going to build around him? But this is very nuanced, not just as simple as stating it there, because it's either a leap of faith to say either Keyonte or Lauri reaches the level needed to contend in the West, meaning 48 through 57 wins. Obviously, the West was better this year than it has been in other years, but that's the type of team you need to be able to compete with. The teams, like, there are 2 teams going home from the play-ins that had over 46 wins. That's just the reality of the fact of the matter. And most of these teams contending in the West are fairly young. So that means the Jazz have to contend with those guys. But furthermore, what's truly considered contending? I think the Jazz at times have had 1 foot in, 1 foot out regarding which direction to head with the franchise in the past few years. And I'm linking this back not just the last 2 years since the trade of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, but even while Mitchell and Gobert were here, knowing there was a chance Donovan Mitchell wouldn't stay beyond his extension, and they wanted to accelerate the timeline before the Jazz were truly ready to contend a couple years, getting Mike Conley and maybe even a degree Bogey, who is aging. They tried to accelerate the timeline, and some of the other players that were supposed to help accelerate the Jazz and grow internally weren't ready yet, and that may have accelerated. And the Jazz had 1 year where I think they really had a chance to contend, and they lost to the Clippers. The other years, I don't think the Jazz were quite ready. But if given truth serum, Conley probably was not worth the price tag, despite my personal affinity for Mike Conley. Loved him on the Grizzlies, loved him on the Utah Jazz, best teammate in the NBA, no technical fouls, became an all-star for the Jazz. But it like the Jazz weren't ready to win at that point because they traded some of those younger pieces that were meant to help Donovan Mitchell, became diminutive in the backcourt with Conley, and lost a couple guys meant to grow alongside Mitchell in Allen and a few other, and a pick that became Brandon Clark, who would have been likely the Jazz's pick per a lot of front office brass. That's one thing. They were showing that their chips were all in that case. That was at least definitive, but I don't know if it was the most responsible way. That said, who knew if Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert were going to stay? And in this case, the more recently, the Jazz haven't truly tanked or truly contended. And I think that was irresponsible. Obviously, you had to know what you had, but I don't think anyone in their right mind truly thought the Jazz last year or this year could compete in the playoffs, even if they were to somehow eke their way into it. So, and that was addressed by Danny Ainge. Ainge pulled the plug this year when the Jazz were ahead of the Warriors, ahead of the Rockets, and on par with the Lakers. And he said, look, we're not as good as those teams, even if our record's better right now. The Jazz certainly had deficiencies, and I think that was wise, despite it must be frustrating to Will Hardy. It must be frustrating to the players. Notably, Lauri Markkanen's played in 403 games and never made the playoffs. That's frustrating, but I think it was the right move. I just wonder why they didn't do so sooner. And last year, I think it was harder to tank than people thought. I was of the belief that Jazz would be in the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes because they just wouldn't have the talent, not because they wouldn't try. Mike Conley really makes everyone better to a point where it was hard to be that bad, while other teams were trying to be that bad. And it's paying dividends. Victor Wembanyama is sensational. I would say he's generational. That's a word that's overused. I think once in a generation, I think it goes LeBron, Victor Wembanyama, and I think the third best prospect in those 20 years in between would be Anthony Davis. And we'll touch on two of those three in this podcast. Now back to Lauri and Keyonte. In the NBA, teams have to be very well built, even with super duper stars, honestly, especially now with the more restrictive collective bargaining agreement. It restricts teams monetarily. I discussed how even the Nuggets, who are the best player in the league, in my estimations, currently needed to hit on late round picks and round out their games of starters to ascend to where they are as the defending champions and likely frontrunners in the Western Conference this year. Lauri is more of the ilk of Jamal Murray than he is of Jokic, and that's not a slight to Lauri Markkanen at all, and it might even be a boost. But even though Murray hasn't been the best player on a team, he's shown he's a monster in the playoffs with the ball in his hands. And Lauri, as Ainge and Hardy and others have publicly addressed, has to work dramatically to improve on the ball. And that's what makes you the star. Obviously, there's players who play two-way and make themselves even better. But the ones that are able to take teams to championships have the ball in their hands. Lauri is a top 30 player in the NBA because of his rare shooting and athleticism mold for his size, but I don't think having him as the Jazz's 1A Tier 1 superstar puts the Jazz in position to truly contend at any point. But that's not to mean he's not a part of the future. It just puts the impetus on the front office to have a clear-cut plan to trade for that star in his timeline or commit to the tank. And I know that's a word that's like a little taboo, but you have to commit to patience and get that star via the draft maybe next season. And maybe it's not that long of a wait because next season's draft is supposed to be spectacular. And we'll talk about that. So if you do that, you have your 1A star, you have the supporting cast, and Lauri Markkanen's not old by any means. He could easily play alongside a blooming star that's younger and coming in now. And now the Jazz have the lots of picks that they can trade for assets if they really find that one star, or they hope to hit on one of the many picks. So I think that for Lauri, you'd have to put success on the back burner, find another star, and he can be a co-star or a secondary option. Now, for Keyonte, I think his most favorable comparison, which I have been saying since the summer of 2022 when I saw him playing the global games for a depleted Baylor squad, was Jamal Murray. I kept saying, I see Jamal Murray, and I couldn't wait to see it. But at every stage of their careers, I went back and researched this, Murray has been better, except arguably in the rookie season, which Keyonte slightly outproduced Murray. Granted, he had more chances, but Murray won the Hoop Summit MVP in high school, was a higher-ranked recruit, scored more per game in college, and was picked higher. I love Keyonte, but don't think he has 1A option if Jamal Murray hasn't been an all-star, and I think Jamal Murray is a favorable comparison. Danny Ainge made the point that we don't know if he's the franchise point guard. He could be a shooting guard, but he does factor into the equation down the road. He can be the point guard of the future, but not the franchise player, in my opinion. Thus, trading is still an avenue, but I feel more strongly about his timeline providing the fruits of the arduous process that is finding the right player and then growing with the new coming star via the draft than I do about the optimism surrounding Lauri. Makes me think Lauri's more likely to be traded because he's further along and probably more desirable at this point. My personal preferred method for getting to the true levels of contention that I desire for Jazz fans, that all of the Jazz fans should desire, is through the draft. I think the Jazz need to lose a lot next year. Get a top 5 pick, meaning you're one of the 5 worst teams in the league. So the draft odds, the ping pong balls don't have to bounce a perfect way for you. Obviously, you'd love to be number 1. But let's draw an example. Get a top 5 pick. Find a franchise guy to pair with Keyonte, this year's top pick, meaning the 2024 draft, and whomever Ainge trades for whomever Ainge trades for to supplement the team, and probably or possibly, unless Lauri's part of those trade chips, Lauri Markkinen as well, who you'd hope to be your co-star. And then you have a young core of Hendricks, George, Lauri, Cooper Flagg, for example, Walker Kessler, Bryce Sensabaugh, this year's flock of rookies and vets added to aid the growth of the youngsters. That's the way I would build the roster. That's the best way to contention, in my opinion. Obviously, you need some luck in there, but you can't shoot yourself in the foot by being non-committal. And I think that's what the Jazz are realizing now. I think there's going to be a committed approach to finding a way to find that superstar, whether it's through trades. Obviously, you've seen some rumors about Trae Young. Trae Young's got his deficiencies to some degree of can this guy be the one top option? Typically, a lot of people think you have to be a bigger wing in today's age. I tend to subscribe to that, but I like the idea of trying to be aggressive and find your guy. I think you can find it next year's draft, and that's the way I'd personally lean. And unless you get some stupendous value for Lauri Markkinen, I would hold on to him because I think he can continue to grow and ascend. And then he's a perfect Robin if he's not a Batman, which I personally don't think he can be a Batman. Coming up next, I'll tell you about some of those rookies to be in this upcoming class. But first, let me tell you about the beauty of DoorDash. Want to make mom smile? Start Mother's Day with flowers or surprise her with gifts from the brand she loves, delivered the very same day with DoorDash. DoorDash is more than just the great food delivery. For instance, does mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur, or is she outdoorsy? No matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout gear, and more. Shop with savings that would make her proud. With a Dash Pass membership, you'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees, including the service fee, do apply. Terms apply. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off of your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with code LOCKEDONNBA. That's Locked On NBA, LOCKEDON NBA, using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Also, guys, you guys need to listen up for this huge announcement. I've been tracking the leaderboards every day, keeping my eye on the scores, putting all my heart into it, and I'm super pumped to announce that I'm finally on top. That's right. Obviously, I'm talking about the hit mobile game Monopoly Go. You've probably heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's 150 million times. It's a great mobile twist on a classic Monopoly. And you guys all play that. I did growing up, and I know it gets super competitive. It's all the same here, but even better. You can play anywhere, anytime. You can explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the moon, all while raking in a huge fortune. Charge rent on iconic properties just like in classic Monopoly. You can charge your friends rent on iconic properties as well. And if you want to battle your friends, you're more than welcome to do so. Or you can team up and make a dominant duo. Or go after their Monopoly money by pulling bank heists and taking wrecking balls to their landmarks. That's the way I tend to do it as a competitive player myself. But my favorite part is the leaderboards, where you can see who's a Monopoly tycoon and who's gone bankrupt. So get yourself on the charts and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store and on Google Play. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in to Locked On Jazz all week, every day. As I know you guys have heard me talk about a lot of the prospects, and there's more to talk about. But first, I want to ask you, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting and all the monotonous noise? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. Let's familiarize you guys with the names of the foreign players commonly thought to be around the top of this draft. These guys are all top 5 in most boards, and the Jazz, as I mentioned, have a 26% chance to be at the top of the draft within the top 4 after the lottery happening on May 12th. So let's start with Alex Sarr. He's, as Richard Stayman told you on Mavs draft yesterday, for the everydayers who didn't listen, I had Richard Stayman on. He gave his insights about who the Jazz should pick, what he thought of various prospects, and I gave my takes as well. And Alex Sarr was his number 1, and I think he's probably going to be my number 1. I haven't fully committed to it, but he's definitely 1 or 2. So let's start with Alex Sarr. He's ranked number 1 on Tankathon, number 2 on Ringer. Kevin O'Connor of the Ringer said, and I thought this was a fascinating quote, He's a skyscraping wing trapped in a center's body with a rare blend of size, finesse, and explosiveness. Well, that sounds pretty cool and pretty standard for modern basketball of what you're looking for. He's 6'11", 217 pounds, averaged 10 points, 5 rebounds, an assist, 1.5 blocks, shot 50% from the field, 28% from three, and 71 from the free throw line. He plays in Australia, so this is a pro league. He really made his jump. He was a well-regarded prospect, made a jump when he played against the G League Ignite in a showcase back, and I want to say it was October, and Sarr stole the show. Ron Hall and Matas Buzelis were the talk. Alexander Sarr became the talk after that. He was the man. So that's where it all started. He's an athletic finisher who honestly I think could use more of his dexterity and fluidity on the perimeter to help himself finish, but he's a very good cutter, gets himself in good spaces. He catches the ball up high. He can catch the ball down low. He's got good hands. If he needs to cut into a post off and steal off his defenders, he's able to fake and get to hook shots and has solid touch around the basket, using it high off the glass or going up to the top row and slamming it home. He handles the ball like a wing. He's at his best catching the ball behind the three-point line and then attacking off the bounce, showing off some of that fluidity and coordination that I was just speaking of. And I think his willingness to pass, and he dribbles live dribble passes, or he delivers live dribble passes, and the willingness to deliver those passes is the more impressive thing, the positive, versus the couple turnovers that he does have. I think he could be really good in short rolls as a connective piece in the half court. And for Perth, the team he plays for, he comes off motion and he gets going towards the basket off of motion. You don't see too many centers with the coordination to do that. And I think that really bodes well for the versatility, the way that versatility is viewed in the NBA. That if you can do more things, the more you're going to play. And he's obviously got a ton of upside on the defensive end. So if he's got that upside on the offensive end, I think that's a really good thing. Defensively, he can move around. He's often compared to Jaren Jackson Jr. and Jonathan Isaac. And those two are defensive specialists, the former defensive player of the year in Jaren Jackson Jr., and in my opinion, a better defender in Jonathan Isaac, who's just had the misfortune of being injured quite frequently. So that means he's got a pretty high floor in that regard. Here are some negatives. And one last positive. I think he'll be really good at switching, and he can also be a secondary or a primary rim protector. Now the negatives. He shoots a lot of jumpers, and he doesn't make that many of them. I mentioned shooting about 28% from three. He's shot poorly in years past. He played for Overtime Elite and shot poorly from three and the free throw line. I don't think his touch away from the basket's great, but I do think he's got good touch on finishes like at the basket, so that's interesting. I also think near the basket, he needs to use his left hand better. He's more prone to contorting and shooting like a kind of like inside out spin with English with his right hand than using his left. But he has the physical makings, and in today's game, he's got the makings of a player that's useful on both ends of the floor and particularly good on the defensive end. I don't foresee a star out of him, though. I just want to be clear with that. I don't foresee a star, and I know if you're going for upside, that may not be the thing you want to hear. Speaking of upside, Nikola Topic, 6'6", 201 pounds, 16 points per game, 4 assists, 6 rebounds, 50% from the field, 28 from three, but 88 from the free throw line. I have said this on air for those of you who listen every day, appreciate it, and off the air as well, and I've said this for a long time. I think if Topic hits, like meaning that his skill sets all happen, his swing skills do reach the levels that make him become as good as he can possibly be, his chances of being a real star are higher than anyone else in this class. I think he has a chance to be the star of the class because he's got this understanding and innate ability to see the game and control aspects of the basketball game. But there are deficiencies. So let's get into his strengths and weaknesses. I think he's a good scorer deep in the paint with a bunch of different finishes using either hand from unusual angles, meaning he's got a lot of craftiness or guile, but that concerns me a little bit in terms of does he have the explosiveness to attack the rack like many do who are slashers, and he is definitely a slasher. He's a quote unquote slippery driver, uses subtle pace changes, head fakes, and clean footwork to get into the teeth of the defense. If he needs to put his shoulder into bigger opponents and draw contact, he does that as well. He gets to the line a fair amount. He uses his interior scoring to supplement his playmaking skills. He gets to the rack and then makes the passes, a little less so than some of the guards that he's compared to are more stop at the elbow and then distribute. He's more get to the rim and kick out or dump off. He's a pretty quick decision maker. I think the fact that he gets to the rim as well as he does makes him make quick decisions, and he's good at making those decisions. I do think he's a bit of a stiff shooter. It's kind of a not I wouldn't say catapulty, but it's not very fluid. Defenders often give him space, and that's concerning. But there's a lot of guards in this class where that's the case. Obviously, we talked about Stephon Castle as having shooting be his swing skill. I think Cody Williams, despite his 42% from three, is also in that ilk. Uh, and I think in this case, he's a bit reluctant to shoot. Sometimes volume is the best indicator if you can shoot. Williams shot 42%, but he barely shot. Castle was not a volume shooter either. He's a reluctant shooter unless he's wide open. And I think it's a little bit in part to a slightly lower release, but he is tall for a guard. I think he is a point guard. He's also shifty enough to change pace to the point where I think maybe he's one of those guys who's got the big enough body and shifty enough that he doesn't have to be sped up at all. He controls the pace himself. Obviously, Luka is the extreme example of this, where he's not athletic compared to this competition, but he always knows where he's going and he chooses the pace. So to me, I think he's a little more boom or bust. If you get the best aspects of him, I think he's got the best chance to be the ball in hand star. But I do think he struggles to find a role if he doesn't hit at the highest level. Not meaning that he couldn't be good, but it's like he's not a role player's kind of definition. The way he plays the game is he typically wants to be the best player at the ball in his hands, and that can work, and sometimes it doesn't. Now there's Zacharie Risacher, who's a bit different. He doesn't necessarily need the ball in his hands to impact the basketball game. He's 6'9", 204 pounds. He is and Topic was ranked fourth in both the Ringer and on Tankathon. Risacher has a bit of a range. He's second on Tankathon and 10th on the Ringer. He's compared quite frequently, as well as from both these outlets, to Michael Porter Jr. as a sizable but not freak athlete who has a good feel for the game and a nice shooting stroke. He's a rapidly developing shooter. He's making a lot of threes, although he's had quite a bit of a slump recently. Over competitions from the prior 2 years, he only made 34% of his threes and 65% of free throws. Up until a recent slump, he was about at 47% from three, and he's definitely got a smooth stroke. You watch him shoot, and you're like, oh, that guy knows how to shoot, even if you didn't watch which ones went in. So I'm not worried about the stroke. He looks the part with the shooting skill set. He comes off screens, he catches and shoots. He can shoot off pin downs. He's got a high release, and he's a tall player. I think he's got good footwork as a shooter as well. That's something I like to talk about as someone who in my not very amazing career was a shooter, and I like to watch the feet, see who gets prepared quickly, and that's why I kind of like Jordan Hawkins and Jet Howard more than I liked Grady Dick coming off screens as a shooter last year. I think he's a solid ball handler for his size, but he's certainly not like your number one option as a ball handler. I think he's someone who could be supplementary in that regard, who sees the floor well, and he's tall enough to see over a defense. I think he does a decent job rebounding the ball, gets his hands in passing lanes because he uses his length well. I don't think he's a superb athlete as a twitchy 3-and-D defender, but I think he uses his length well to influence the game. And like I've talked about with Michael Porter Jr., and I will talk about in the next segment, rebounding when you're that tall becomes defensive. Like, that's a defensive plus. If you're that tall and you use your length to do something valuable, you don't have to be the world's best at sliding your feet if you can shoot the ball that well. You just need to not be a overwhelming, glaring negative. I will say he's a good decision maker. He makes the decisions quickly, but he does struggle to score at the rim. Only made 38% of those attempts in the last 2 years. This season, he's making about 51%. So it's a notable improvement. His athleticism and his shooting are peaking, but he just doesn't jump very high. He doesn't get over the defense, so he's very skill reliant when he finishes. And I think he needs to prove his shooting is real to make a real pick. I'm a little lower on Risacher than I think the consensus, but I see the appeal as like, hey, he's got a high floor, but I tend to be a potential guy when I draft near the top. I want someone to alter my franchise. That said, this year's class, not quite as franchise altering as some other classes. Well, those are some of the best regarded prospects. So who could the Jazz be in contention to draft this year? And who do you guys like? I'm working on my board and sifting through some film. So I'll have a board out for you guys to refer to. And a lot of notes like this in terms of breaking down their game is coming soon. And I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about that once my board is ready. So coming up next, we'll check in on the playoffs and examine why the Nuggets were able to overcome and topple the Lakers, who led by 20, played sensationally, yet fell short. But first, a word from FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. I've used it when I was in Denver for March Madness last year, made some money, and they mailed me a check, so I am certainly a fan myself. Bet on everything from slap shot, like I said, bet on anything from slap shots to home runs to dunks. You can do it all. I wish I could. I worked in the NBA this year, so I can't personally do it, but you should make your picks regarding the playoffs because I know you guys who watch this are experts and you can make yourself some extra scratch doing so. What are you waiting for? Visit fanduel.com/locked on to make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Also, this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get at you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. For example, I could tell you how I really and truly feel about who the Jazz should draft, but sometimes it's not that simple. And that's not all that's on one's mind. And you need a kind and unbiased audience all the same. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams and who we think they should draft, like I said. And it's important to get those things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. The playoffs are forming a lot of my basketball analysis in terms of how to construct a roster, how to build that roster with limiting overlap and encouraging me to think about varying skill sets and making players be ready sooner. Like, you don't necessarily have the luxury of waiting for potential in a lot of cases. If you're trying to contend, you need guys to help you sooner, especially with the CBA. Well, I talked about the Nuggets. I talked about the general manager Booth and his philosophy of a lack of redundancy and spreading out your talents to different levels. Well, I'll explain how the Nuggets did that and how it became true and how the Jazz can emulate this in their draft approach to end up contending like the Nuggets are right now in a few years. Well, let's take you through the story of the game. The Lakers led game one and the Nuggets won comfortably, but game two felt different. That's because the Lakers were not being spearheaded by hard to continue shooting percentage. They set the tone with LeBron taking a charge and rebuking Murray on a rack attack, trying to dunk it. And you felt like, oh man, this is a serious ball game. And Anthony Davis was otherworldly. He was sensational. Best I've seen Anthony Davis play. And he felt like Kentucky Anthony Davis in 2011, 2012. He was attacking Jokic in ISO, leading the Lakers to a lead by as much as 20 with 22 minutes to play. So how did Denver use their varying skill sets to from player to player to come back and beat the Los Angeles Lakers? It started with their positional size and switching a matchup defensively in which they were getting beaten. Anthony Davis was so good, and he was killing Nikola Jokic. We've all clowned Anthony Davis for losing the matchups to Jokic in years past and how he was getting bullied in the post. Well, Anthony Davis attacked Jokic, who was playing off of Davis, allowing for Davis to catch and face and get to spots and score to the tune of making 11 of his first 12 shots in the first half, scoring 24 or 32 of his 32 total in the first half. Now, Davis finished 14 of 19, so he wasn't stopped in the second half, but he was limited. But the matchups change that sparked the rally because out of the Lakers, the way that the Lakers played in the first half, you felt like was sustainable this time, unlike the first game where you felt like, okay, the Nuggets are going to hit some shots and the Lakers are going to have to cool off. This time it was sustainable, so much so that they only elongated their lead out of the halftime break. You felt like, okay, well, maybe they're going to win this one. Like, I was skeptical, but then I started to believe for the Lakers. The difference was they switched Aaron Gordon onto Anthony Davis and Contavious Caldwell-Pope onto LeBron, who Gordon was guarding initially, meaning that Jokic would guard a a little bit reluctant Rui Hachimura. Jokic then played off of Hachimura, daring him to beat them and crowded the paint. Booth's philosophy, like I mentioned in the previous episode, this is on Monday. So for you everydayers, thank you for listening to that. And for those of you who haven't listened, maybe give it a little check out, but I'll try to reiterate it here for you. Booth's philosophy regarding positional size has Porter play more like a forward and prioritize his rebounding and being capable defensively rather than just being a shooter, which makes him a little bit one-dimensional. They talk about not being one-dimensional and filling in 3 of 4 checkpoints. Well, Porter was tasked with guarding Austin Reeves, who didn't have a particularly good game, and he was able to help clean the glass. Jokic was near the hoop because defensively he's not great. He was getting killed in the first half by a sensational individual performance by Davis, but what he was he was near the hoop, meaning that Rui Hachimura had to beat them from 3. Austin Reeves had to beat them off the catch, and they won the glass battle with their positional size. The front court of the Nuggets, Jokic, Gordon, and Porter snared 36 of the 45 rebounds for the Nuggets, and that's their starting front court, which was 7 more than the Lakers. Porter's a tough guy to guard for the Lakers too, as he needs to be guarded by length, as he's got such a high release and he's such a sensational shooter. And he was able to help the Nuggets, especially when Hachimura had to guard Jokic when Davis got in foul trouble, meaning that Davis was trying to protect the paint as a help guy, and rotations led to Porter getting open shots. He made 6 threes and in critical moments, and he was a compliment to the Stars. So that's a lot of roster building. The other defensive adjustment that won them the game, in my opinion, well, it started with Gordon guarding Davis because Davis needed to be slowed down because he was that dominant. But what it ended up being, I think, even more critical in the final moments was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who I think likely will be one of the 10 defensive players honored for his defensive acumen this season, was guarding LeBron James. And he was not allowing the switch. He was fighting over the screens and staying glued to LeBron James, who could then not target Nikola Jokic as someone to attack while playing drop coverage. LeBron no longer has that otherworldly athleticism. He's still a tier A athlete, don't get me wrong. And I love LeBron as much as the next, but he's no longer able to attack in the same way with speed around screens. It's more brain and brawn. And yes, this time, those are often compared against one another, but this time it's together. He uses his brain to analyze the defense and his brawn to back down the defender. So he typically uses his strength to attack the smaller players and his speed, and now he doesn't quite have the speed. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's foot speed enabled him to get over screens and force LeBron to play bully ball, and then they wouldn't help. Christian Braun did a great job on LeBron at times as well, making LeBron play hard and wear down. So they didn't relinquish ground and allowed for Nuggets defenders to stay more attached to shooters as Jokic was in the middle, so they didn't need to help as far, and it made Rui Hachimura become a dare shooter. In college basketball, it's called dorking a shooter, meaning that guy's the dork, you have to beat us. And Rui Hachimura and Austin Reeves didn't punish that type of defense. They were allowed to shoot because of the defensive alterations of the Denver Nuggets. One thing I've thought of, and I saw this on Twitter, is if I were the Lakers, I would have played Jackson Hayes a little bit as a roll guy and a vertical lob threat, meaning Nikola Jokic would have to stay attached to his role, allowing for LeBron not to be as influenced by someone lurking in the middle. Not that Jokic is a shot blocker, but he's a body in the middle, meaning that the team can have faith that if LeBron backs his way down too deep, that there's someone who can alter what would be a shot for LeBron James. Now, if there was a roll threat, Jokic would have to stay attached to the roller, and I think that'll be a likely adjustment. The other adjustment would be maybe Taurean Prince will play more than Hachimura because he's been shooting well. But the game wasn't only one on the defensive side. It came down to the clutch, and the Denver Nuggets were amazing in the clutch. Lastly, the best 2 players for the Nuggets who I haven't mentioned, Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. Neither was spectacular in the game, and don't just look at the stats because Jokic puts up unbelievable stats, and these were gaudy. He had a 20-point, 20-rebound triple-double. But I don't think it was his best game, and I think Anthony Davis was the better player between those 2 players in this game. But in the clutch, their offensive rating was 200. 200, meaning that they scored that if they played 100 possessions based on the way that they played in the clutch, they would score 200 points in those 100 possessions, basically a 2 every possession. That's gaudy. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the Lakers effectively played a perfect game, but the Nuggets' versatility and weaponry overcame them despite leading more in more of the minutes between the first 2 games. And now heading home, you typically feel, okay, well, the Lakers got to be disappointed they didn't win that game, but they'd have a chance if you were to just look at the narratives there. But I think this series is over. I think that was a back-breaking blow, that this is a must-win game for the Los Angeles Lakers, who played as well as you possibly could have. But the roster construction and philosophies only able to be implemented because of the versatility of the players for the Denver Nuggets, which the Jazz can start to emulate and has starting to influence my philosophy of drafting, has enabled the Nuggets to, I think, put a critical blow on the Los Angeles Lakers. And what's next for King James? Well, thanks for listening. I'll be back with you for more Locked On Jazz content tomorrow. I look forward to being back with you. But also, I want to remind you, Locked On has launched its first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On Plus, our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV's channel app. And with the NFL draft coming up, I will be listening as well for my Indianapolis Colts, and I just have sheer curiosity about the draft. And then, of course, with the NBA draft coming, listen to that as well. Signing off from Locked On Jazz, I'm Leif Thulin, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with more Locked On Jazz.